So when I was about 11 years old, I moved with my family to the mountains, to a house that was on a property that my family owned. And behind this property was the largest imaginable pile of rubbish, okay? Just a gigantic pile of rubbish. I have a picture to give you an idea. It's not quite, it's actually much bigger than this, okay? So this isn't a great illustration. Imagine like 4 or 5 of these. So just like the worst fly tipping and just over and over again, just piles and piles and piles of stuff. About a house full, really, of just rubbish. And not good rubbish either. But someone thought, this is not rubbish, this is a treasure. You know, they thought, they actually put it all there, and they didn't mean to throw trash away. They were collecting their different things that they thought they would want. And so we had this giant mess that was somebody's actual treasure. And so my dad said, well, this isn't a terribly great situation, and it's a mess, and it's not entirely sanitary. And so my dad said, could you please take care of your rubbish to this person, whoever this is, okay? And nothing happened, nothing happened. And this happened for quite some time. And then Dad changed his tune. He said, actually, just come and get anything that you think you would want. Come and get whatever you think you would actually want. And so shortly after that, Dad said, all right, so here's what we're going to do. We took out this big trash can, and we would throw all the stuff that was, just a little bit in the trash can every weekend. For 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, for an hour, the lads would go out and gather some trash and throw it in the trash bin and burn it. Because this was before we thought about the environment, so sorry about that. Anyway, this is what we would do, right? And it would almost make us sick, the fumes coming off of this, and I hated doing this. And it made no difference. I mean, we were about this for a whole year, and there was still a gigantic pile, as long as you could imagine, in the back of the house. And so Dad's like, right, we are done with this. And he went and he got several cans of gas, and he doused the whole thing. And I saw what is by far the largest inferno I will ever see. We were 40 feet back, and my face felt like it was blazing. I have no idea how we got away with this, because there are fires in the place where this takes place, and it's dangerous. And we managed to not burn down the rest of the areas around us. It was an amazing scene, and it worked a treat, actually, because after that, lots of grass came up, and beautiful trees came and blossomed, and it was wonderful. It was exactly what was needed. But could you imagine then, after we had done all of this, that person came back and said, you didn't give me enough time. There was so much stuff in there that I wanted. How dare you burn down my treasure? That's how it ends. How dare you burn down my rubbish heap? Would it surprise you to know that I think, actually, we all have a rubbish heap in our lives? Something that we imagine as treasure, something that we protect jealously. Something that we say, oh no, maybe that's not something I really want, but then we go on with it day after day after day. And God says, you know what I really want for you? I just want you to take the gas out, douse the thing, and burn it down. And that rubbish heap is your own self-righteousness. It's your own thoughts that you've done pretty well, or at least you're trying. And maybe God will receive you because you're a good person. Yeah, you're a good person. You've done some good things, and you know what God wants you to do, and you've done enough of it. You've done enough of it so that God will certainly receive you. And Paul this morning is saying there is no way God is going to receive you based on what you did. There is no way anybody who claims to be a good person is going to get in good with God, go to heaven, have passing marks. It is not going to happen. That's what this passage is about. It will not take place. And so we've been going through, this is the third lesson and the third time that Paul is trying to say we are all under God's right condemnation, which means God looks at us and he says, you're not acceptable. And so it started with people who are amoral, maybe atheists. They say, I don't believe in God, and I do what I want. God says, I'm angry about that. But then we went to the moral people who know what is wrong. And he said, well, the moral people still do what is wrong, even though they know what's wrong. And now today, he's come to the church, okay? He's come to the church. He's come to us. He's come to those who say, we are your fans, Jesus. We are your fans, God. And God says, maybe, but you are just as wicked as the rest of that lot. And you need help. Big idea this morning. Out with the rubbish of self-righteousness. Out with the rubbish of self-righteousness. Replace it with the new heart from Christ. Out with the rubbish of self-righteousness. Replace it with a new heart from Christ. So let's start with, who is this self-righteous person? It's probably you. Okay, verse 17. Verse 17, chapter 2, page 1129. Now you, if you call yourself a Jew, if you rely on the law and boast in God, if you know his will and you approve of what is superior, because you are instructed by the law, if you are convinced that you are a guide for the blind, a light for those in the dark, the instructor of the foolish, a teacher of little children, because you have in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? Do you not teach yourself? So, first off, this passage has been used very wickedly by people in a very anti-Semitic way, because they've used this to bash Jewish people in general, and to say something is wrong with those people. And of course, you know that I don't like that at all. And that's not the way I think that we're supposed to read that. This isn't all Jewish people here, part one, but this is somebody who is presumptuous, very proud of their beliefs, and thinks that they have got A-levels with God. You know, I've got A-levels. He definitely thinks I'm at the top, and all of you little people down there that don't do all the good things that I do, you're at the bottom. And remember, it says that he's proud of doing the law. Okay, so now, when it says the law here, it's not talking about he's proud of believing the first 5 books of the Bible, what we would call Torah. The law doesn't say just do lots of rules, the first 5 books of the Bible. He's talking about just the very rules. Just do all the rules, he says. And if you do all the rules, if you do every last one, you're certainly going to go to heaven. So if you do good things, you're going to go to heaven. That's the person that we have here. And if you were to actually read the Torah, it doesn't say that that's the way to go to heaven. It says you can have a relationship with God, and within that relationship, you can do these things that he likes, and that will be kind of your way of reciprocating his love for you. Totally different idea. But during this time, Judaism had gone law crazy. Just do these rules, and you will certainly get in with God. But now, let's translate that, because that is still an extremely popular idea. Do a lot of good things, and you will get in with God, or you will achieve enlightenment, or you will be joined with the one reality, or you will have your 5,000 versions, or whatever it is that they come up with, right? This is the mantra of society. You do a lot of good things, and you get something good out of it. And we apply that to all sorts of, it's like every religion right there. Every religion but one. Because the Bible's going to tell us it does not work that way. And so to Christianize this, we would say, do you consider yourself a very religious churchgoer? Do you consider yourself a very religious churchgoer? And there's such pride. But the pride isn't actually based on what is happening in their life. They're breaking the very rules they claim to love. Yeah. And so, in illustration, I'm going to share about a certain church leader that I met with for lunch. Nobody knows this person. Okay? And nobody can find this person, so please don't try. Yeah? Okay. And so I went out to lunch once with a gentleman, and it was the first time I'd really met him. And on the way out, he said, I am kosher. I'm kosher. And I said, oh, are you Jewish? No, not Jewish. What's going on? And he said, well, I keep all of the rules. I take God seriously, very seriously. Everyone should take those rules seriously. Oh, okay. All right, great. So anyway, we went to a restaurant, and as he's discussing about all these things he's doing and how great they are, he orders a smothered burrito, okay? That's a Mexican item, smothered burrito. And it comes out, and it's got green sauce. And the green sauce, I'm looking at it closely, and I noticed there are little chunks of pork. Yeah, there's chunks of pork. As he's talking about, literally, it's on his lips as he's speaking. I'm keeping kosher. It's so great. He's eating a burrito that is not kosher. Yeah. And I couldn't. Now, what ended up happening is actually this same person would get up in the church and he would do announcements. And every single announcement he would do, he would manage to put in a little sermon. And the sermon would go something like, "You guys aren't doing what I'm doing. I'm doing a lot of good. You should become like me." And it got so obnoxious. And that's the picture we have here. It's not that, and we have to understand this, it's not that loving God is wrong. It's not that doing what God asks is wrong. It's not that anything in the Old Testament is bad. It's good. If you do the things that God asks, that's good. You've done something good. But you shouldn't say, now I'm justified, especially because you actually break it. You always end up breaking the very rule you claim says that you're righteous and good and whatnot. And the punchline is, we're all laughing. But actually, we kind of do this ourselves. It's something that we're doing. Even us who say that we are good people. I was thinking about this and how I, myself, am just so guilty on occasion of saying, look at the law, I do it. Aren't I a good person? Not as a theology, but just as a behavior. You break the very rule that you claim to follow. And so how can you go before God and say, I should be led into heaven on that? No way. And so Paul doesn't bash the law. Paul doesn't bash the law. But we don't do the law. And so it doesn't count for us. And this is really interesting. I was remembering this. I once had a friend who was not a believer, and he was working in a dirty magazine shop, okay? And he stopped, and he became a believer. And then he was sharing about how hard it was for him to get out of that lifestyle. And so some young women were talking to me about this. And they were, so they were sitting there, and they're going, can you believe it? He came out of this, and that's terrible. And then one of the young ladies, actually, and I was a young man at this point, she looked over at me and she said, isn't it great that you were raised in such a better environment and that you would never do the things that he's struggling with doing? And I said, yeah, it's great. Lies! Your righteousness is false. You cannot be justified by being a good person. We all struggle with it. We all struggle with following the very laws that we claim to believe. Now, let's look at the vices. I want to convince you that you too are in the same boat as this person here. Verse 21. Verse 21. You then, do you not teach yourself? You who preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law? As it's written, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Three things to note. The first is that these three things are examples of the Ten Commandments. He's quoting from the Ten Commandments. So stealing, committing adultery, and committing idolatry, which means you worship something besides God. You put something besides God at the top of your life. Well, who hasn't ever stolen? And who hasn't ever lusted? And who hasn't ever put God second in their life? Was there a time where you put God second? We all do these. We all do these. And so let's just be honest. We're not good people according to this book. And we shouldn't say we did enough to get into heaven because it says that actually we're lawbreakers. And that's the thing. It's the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments is the law. And so if you break three of them, you're basically just a lawbreaker. That's who you are. And so we are in this boat where we're tempted to be self-righteous, but it is of no good whatsoever. Second thing to notice, heroes of faith actually broke all these, okay? So Abraham, he stole from the Canaanites. So remember how stealing is the first one? And David, he committed adultery. And then Hezekiah, he stole the gold out of the temple to give to this evil man who said, I'm going to come and destroy your country. He said, here's some gold that I took from the temple. And so they all broke the rules too, but they were all heroes of the faith. How do you think they got there? Not by doing things, but by believing something. Yeah, it's paving the way for us to see how we get out of the problem that we're not good enough in God's eyes. And then look, it says unbelievers, they look at our hypocrisy. They look at the fact that we say, we are good moral people. And then they catch us being immoral and they say, that's why I don't go to church. Scoundrels. And they're right, okay? They're right. If we get up here and we say, we're good people, we've earned heaven, God's like, you know what you've actually done? You are scaring people away. And some of them blaspheme me. And that's what God said to David, actually, when he committed adultery. He sent along Nathan to say, everybody knows you did this, and all the nations are having a good laugh, but they're taking me no longer seriously because of what you've done. And so there is something really heinous and criminal about Christians saying, I'm a good person. I'm going to heaven. I've done some good works. Or perhaps we say, well, I haven't done that much, but I want to, and doesn't that count? And God says, no, it does not count. You need something else. You need something else. Out with the rubbish of self-righteousness. Replace it with the new heart God offers. Next thing to note is no one is by default in God's family. This is verse 25. Verse 25, it says this, circumcision has value if you observe the law, but if you break the law, you have become as though you had not been circumcised. So then, if those who are not circumcised keep the law's requirements, will they not be regarded as though they were circumcised? The one who is not circumcised physically and yet obeys the law will condemn you, even though you have the written code and circumcision because you're a lawbreaker. Okay? So very interesting. Now, Paul is not saying, actually, and this is important, that circumcision is useless and worthless and shouldn't happen for those who have a Jewish background. He's not saying that at all. In fact, we know he's not saying that because in the book of Acts, there's a young man named Timothy, and he is half Gentile and half Jewish, and Paul circumcises him because then he can enter the synagogue, and there's he can be on equal standing, as it were, for the Jewish conversation. Okay, so he does that. What it's saying is that if you just have this one mark and there is no righteousness in you and there's no connection with God and you're not trusting Him, that it doesn't really matter. It means nothing. So if you're just baptized, right? If you're just confirmed, but then the rest of your life is not so great, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't stand for anything. The sign is like a lie. It's like the ring, right, that somebody wears, and then they decide that they're going to fool around. They put it away in their pocket, right? Well, when they wear it, it doesn't mean anything either. Okay? If they're just going to put it in their pocket, it doesn't mean anything. It means nothing to them. God says the same is true of that person. Now, in the Talmud, which is a kind of a bunch of fables that involve biblical characters, and it's a kind of folklore. In the Talmud, there's a story about Abraham sitting at the door of hell. And as people are walking in, he says, are you circumcised? And if anyone is circumcised, he's like, you don't belong here, go upstairs. And they go to heaven, they don't stay down there. And so the idea is, like, listen, you were born into the covenant, and you're going to die, and you're going to go to heaven. Have you ever thought to yourself, why am I going to go to heaven one day? Oh, I know why. Because I've always gone to church. I've always done these things, right? I'm going to go up, not down, because it's in my DNA or something. Paul says that's ridiculous. Now, this one comes out for me in funerals, actually. So when somebody dies, and then there's a bunch of people who don't go to church, right? They don't go to church, but now that they have this relative who has died, they're like, we gotta make peace with our past here. And so they go to the church that person went to like 60 years ago, right? They go to the church that person went, and they say, our father, actually, we were looking, I think he'd mentioned that he was baptized here. He was baptized here. So would you do the funeral? And the pastor says, yeah, I guess I can do the funeral, right? So he doesn't know these people, and he doesn't know the man. And then he's like, so tell me, what happened after the baptism, Well, he just never went to church ever again, you know. I mean, and he did some bad things, but you know what? He's okay, right? You know, that's the question. He's okay. Would you do a sermon, and in the sermon, would you say, like, you know, we know he's in heaven now? Well, no, I cannot say that, because that meant nothing if you don't back it up with a real relationship with Christ. All of the rights that we have as Christians, whatever they may be, lighting incense sticks, showing up here, going there, and we think, you know, I got to be in the book now. God says, that means nothing to me if the heart isn't in the right place. Okay, out with the rubbish of self-righteousness. It gets better, by the way. The ending is really nice. Out with the rubbish of self-righteousness. Replace it with the new heart God offers. And this is what we see in verse 28, the new heart that God offers. So looking in verse 28. A person is not a Jew who is one only outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. No, a person who is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is circumcision of the heart by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God. So there's a hint now of the gospel in these last verses. You're not good enough on your own. You haven't done enough good. There is someone who does please God, who does good for the right reasons, and that person has had a transformed heart. It says circumcision of the heart. I don't know if you think that circumcision is a lovely idea, but the idea is removing something toxic from what is something safe. You know, take away the bad part so that the good part doesn't suffer. It's like if you've got cancer, removing the cancer, or if you've got gangrene, you know, get rid of that part before it infects everything else and could kill you. That's the idea. You need a circumcised heart. There's something in your heart that just gravitates towards rebellion against God. And dressing that up and saying, no, it's not there. Actually, I've done a lot of good things. God says, no, you still have a heart problem. And it comes out in the fact that you cannot do what I ask you to do. But I have a solution, he says. The Spirit of God can give you an uncircumcised heart, a new heart. This is exactly what Moses said in the first book in the Bible. Okay? Moses gives the people the law, and then he says, so God and I have been talking, and he says, you're not going to do any of this. You're not going to listen to it. You don't want to do it. You're going to rebel. And you know how we talked about, like, if you don't obey, then you're going to get dragged off into exile, and it's going to be really bad. That's going to happen to you. That's what he says. And he says, oh, that you would have circumcised hearts. That's what you really need. You need to be changed on the inside. And so, actually, Paul is not an innovator here. He's just saying, it's time. We've lived under the idea of trying to be good enough. It hasn't worked out. God wants to give you a new heart. Isn't that wonderful? Let's look at Ezekiel 36, and then we're going to draw to a close. 36. Ezekiel 36, which is going to be on page... On the
screen.
Oh, it's on the screen. Well, not the whole thing. But yes, a good portion of it. And we're starting in verse 24. For I will, the Lord speaking, I will take you out of the nations. I will gather you from all the countries and bring you back into your land. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart. I will put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to do my law. To do my law. And so this is actually speaking about what Jesus gives us. We are not good enough before God. And no amount of going to church and no amount of trying to do this deed or that deed that God has said I would like you to do, none of that is going to justify us because God sees the real person beneath. And so because he knows that we're broken and we know that we need his help, he sent Jesus. And Jesus died the death penalty that you and I deserve. And then he rose again. And if we will trust him, we get his heart. We get God's heart, the good heart, the heart that desires to do what is loving, the heart that desires to live for others, the heart that says, I'm not going to be selfish. I'm going to love God and love others. And this list of rules here, I'm going to do those things because I know that it pleases God. And he's loved me so much, how could I say no? That's the way I want to live. That's the kind of life that God says I accept. The one that comes to the cross and surrenders, the one that gets the new heart from the sacrifice that Jesus offered. The kind of person that God does not accept is, hey, I went to church when I was a kid, and I try every once in a while, and that has to be good enough. God says it's not. God says it's not good enough. But I've been going to church now, and I'm trying really hard. Isn't that good enough? God says it's not. What's good enough is Jesus. Do you have that new heart? I was having a conversation with somebody this week, and it was talking about, that you can know the facts about what Jesus did, but that doesn't mean it's yours. You actually have to kind of invite God and come to him and surrender your life to him. And he just said, well, I've never done that. He'd gone to church his whole life. I've never done that. You guys, think about that. Do you have the new heart? Out with the rubbish of self-righteousness. Replace it with the new heart God offers. A couple of ways that we can apply this as we close. The first is, let's get rid of this nasty, self-righteous pride. There is nothing worse in a church than people who really think they've got it all together and are good, and they try to make everybody else see it. And who wants to see that anyway? How do we get rid of it? We make far more of what Jesus did for us than what we do. We stop talking about ourselves and all that we do. And we start talking about Jesus and all that he has done. We must fight self-righteous pride our entire faith walk. It's always there. You've arrived now, Prisman. Why? You went to seminary. You know more than everybody. You got Hebrew. Okay. There's always a reason to say, now I've done it. But we say, no, that Jesus has done it. And I am needy. And I am poor. And I open myself up to the world and say, I've got all sorts of flaws. Haven't I done that today? Do that too with me. And then make much of Christ. Number 2, if you haven't got a new heart, then you are by default self-righteous, and God is angry. Okay? This is so important. If you don't have that new heart, if you say, I don't think the Spirit of God has come to live in my life, and I haven't trusted Jesus, then that means that you are a self-righteous person. You think, I've generally done a good job. Or you say, no, I haven't done a good job, but I just don't care. Okay? Either one of those, you're under God's righteous wrath. You're under God's righteous wrath. And so the idea is that you should let Jesus save you. And there comes a time in your life when you invite Jesus to become Lord of your life, and then you go on and you live for him from that day forward and not for yourself. Maybe that day is today for you. It's a simple prayer to God. I'm sorry for what I've done. Thank you for sending Jesus to die for me. I'll live for you from now on. So anyway, in a moment here, we're going to pray. And if you'd like to trust Jesus, and you're willing to live for him the rest of your life. That's a big call, isn't it? If you've made that decision, you're willing to confess your sins, you can pray along with me just a simple prayer that I'll lead you in. Okay? Third thing here. Realize that God wants to rid you of sin very badly. It says here that God is very upset. The wrath of God is revealed against all ungodliness. And what it means by that, it means ungodliness of people who say, I don't care about God, and ungodliness from people who say, oh yeah, I want to do what God says, and then don't do it. God is upset at adultery and idolatry and stealing and all the things that you do. God is really, really upset at that. He doesn't want you to do it because he loves you. And he's asking you to take his grace, to take his love, to take his mercy, to let it change you, and to slowly keep coming towards him. I'm not saying you have to be perfect. I'm not saying For goodness sakes, no one is going to be justified by what they do. And yet, when we trust in God, he can do in us this wonderful work to make us lovely people. And perhaps you need to pray today a prayer of recommittal to the Lord. God, come and forgive me for doing these things that I'm doing, but also, Lord, I just ask that you would help me to put these away. And so you can pray right along with the other people that are praying to invite Jesus into their life. And you can say, God, here's what I struggle with, and I'm just going to admit that this is wrong. Will you come and help me to fix it? So 3 things for you to think about, okay? Let's put out the self-righteousness. How do we do that? Let's start making Jesus the most important thing and minimizing ourselves. Number 2, asking Jesus to have that new heart if you haven't. And then number 3, saying, I got some stuff, God, and I want to lay it down to you. I want you to think about, there will be a moment of quiet, and then I'll pray a simple prayer. You can come along with me if you want. But in that moment, I would love you to say something to God. This has been interesting. You get to hear from me, but now it's your chance to say something to God. What are you going to say? I don't know. But I hope it's related to this. Let's take a moment to pray.